on fire and has collapsed. Building 7 had been evacuated earlier today. It had been damaged when the tower above it collapsed. Several radical Palestinian groups denied involvement in the terrorist attacks in the United States. U.S. Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat condemned the attacks, but on the streets there were scattered rallies of celebration. NPR's Jennifer Ludden reports from Jerusalem.
In the West Bank city of Nablus, several thousand people marched, clapping hands and waving the Palestinian flag. Outside Jerusalem's Old City, a few dozen people passed out sweets to children as passers-by honked approval. Many Palestinians say they're confident these attacks were carried out to further their cause and to protest the United States' unconditional support of Israel. Several shopkeepers denounced President Bush for failing to intervene in the past year of spiraling Arab-Israeli conflict. This is what Bush wants, said one. This is what he gets. A shaken-looking Yasser Arafat called the attacks shocking and unbelievable and offered condolences. Israel also condemned the attacks and stepped up its own security. Tel Aviv's airport has been closed to all foreign airlines for at least 24 hours. Jennifer Ludden, NPR News, Jerusalem.
U.S. financial markets will be closed again tomorrow after this morning's attack on the World Trade Center. The New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, and the American Stock Exchange suspended trading. Now, a statement say they will continue to be closed tomorrow. After conferring tomorrow, another announcement will be made. This is NPR News.
It's 2:34. Time now for Arizona News. I'm Nelson Warnell. A University of Arizona community gathering was held on the Mall at noon today to brief students, faculty, and staff on the current situation in New York and Washington, D.C. U of A President Peter Likens said it was necessary for everyone to remain calm and not overreact.
There will be a temptation in our land, and there may be, sadly, a temptation on our campus to play out the anger in ways that are wrongly focused on members of our own community.
Several thousand attended the gathering. Members of the audience were invited to speak, and they also echoed President Likens' assessments of the situation. A University of Arizona alum living in New York says the city is in a state of shock following terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Karen Papagapatos says there's almost no traffic in New York City, and people are walking around in a state of shock. She says clouds of dust are still rolling through the city.
It just looks like, a big beautiful sky blue. It just looks like a big black, cloud of smoke. That's it. It's huge. It's huge. And everybody's walking. And they're not walking very fast. They're just all in shock. I've never seen anything like it in my life.
Papagapatos says there's very little vehicular traffic in New York City today. She says most people don't and won't try to go home because few exit routes are available to them. Some of the bridges in New York City have been closed. And Congressman Jeff Flake says, like all Americans, he's grieving about today's tragic events on the East Coast. He says his thoughts and prayers go out to the victims and their families. The 1st District Republican says America must send a clear and unequivocal message that this attack will not be tolerated. 6th District Republican Congressman J.D. Hayworth says the cowardly attacks are acts of war against the United States of America. He says the U.S. must respond accordingly. He says any nation harboring any or enabling those responsible for today's attacks should be considered an enemy of the United States. He says they should be the subject to the consequences of any military actions. For KUAZ News, I'm Nelson Warnell.
This is special coverage from NPR News. In Washington, I'm Linda Wertheimer.
I'm Noah Adams.
And I'm Robert Siegel in New York. Of the 4 planes that were hijacked today, 1 did not reach its target. United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco crashed in Pennsylvania. There were 45 people on board when the jet slammed into a grassy field. NPR's Ken Barkis is just outside Shanksville, Pennsylvania, in the south-central part of the state. It's about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. And Ken, this is the flight from which there have been stories, at least, that passengers were making calls on their cell phones, describing what was happening in the flight. Is that correct?
That's what we hear. We've heard that there was one passenger for sure who was in a bathroom, apparently, who was calling 911 and saying that the plane was being hijacked. The 911 dispatcher listened as long as he could, and then heard an explosion, and that was the last thing they heard. What's remarkable about the site, Robert, is how remote this is. On the way here, I've seen many Amish or Mennonite out in their field. This is really a very remote area. Where it actually crashed looks like it's a reclaimed strip mine. It's a large field, as you mentioned, about 80 miles east of Pittsburgh. And really, there are hundreds and hundreds of federal officials here. It's almost an alphabet soup of agencies, the ATF, FBI, NTSB. Most surprisingly, some of the first people here were actually postal inspectors. No one is being turned away who can help out here. There are even road crews from Pennsylvania that are helping at the site right now.
But helping at the site at this point, I assume, it doesn't mean that people hold out any hope of rescuing passengers or crew, do they?
Well, I think that's right. There are, this is a 3 to 5 mile area of a crime scene, a huge crime scene. One person who went actually into the woods where pieces of the plane seemed to be scattered came out and saying that there was no piece larger than a phone book, that he didn't see any bodies at all. He didn't see any pieces of the plane that were larger than a phone book. Someone else said they thought that, an ATF official said the plane literally broke up into thousands of pieces.
Does it seem from what people described that the plane was still flying west, that is, as it would have been from Newark to San Francisco when it went down?
I think so. There was a guy I talked to who was running a bulldozer who said it came down he said if it had come down 50 feet sooner, he wouldn't be here right now. It came down very fast. The people around here, even in a town 2-3 miles away, felt the shaking and vibrations before they heard an explosion. I'm seeing them now bringing in cadaver-sniffing dogs. They're also bringing in dozens of these huge diesel-powered lights, assuming that they're going to be into the investigation well into the night here.
Thank you, Ken. NPR's Ken Barkis speaking to us from Shanksville, Pennsylvania.